Oh, hello there. Welcome to the short form emotion coaching training today. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Emotion coaching is quite well distributed across the UK now, but hopefully by joining the course today and the longer course later on in January, you will get a more in-depth and very up-to-date version of what the emotion coaching team are recommending. So let's get cracking. I will just start by sharing the PowerPoint. And there we go. So welcome to Emotion Coaching. My name's Kate Asker-Smith. I'm the Specialist Educational Psychologist leading on the Trailblazer. I'm one of the Specialist Educational Psychologists leading on the Trailblazer, and Emotion Coaching is part of the Trailblazer approach, whole school developmental approach that we're doing across Bradford at the moment. This slide gives you an overview of what the full course is going to entail. I will just dot in and out of each of these sections in this short form training, so you get an idea of what the whole training is going to look like. So emotion coaching is not about managing behaviour, but it is about enabling and empowering others to self-regulate through a relational connection with an internal framework. The idea of relational approaches being more effective than a more behaviourist approach isn't anything new now. This emotion coaching is very much a relational approach to managing children's well-being and self-regulation. It's about empowerment. So it isn't about managing, it's more about training and rehearsing and practicing and learning over time how to self-regulate. So why would we do emotion coaching? Well, there's lots of evidence to say, and it is an evidence-based strategy based on the work of John Gottman, that children who have access to emotion coaching techniques are better able to delay gratification, control their impulses, have better self-control, better self-soothing when they're distressed, have better attention. And inevitably, this leads to better academic attainment in school, better social skills in school, so children are better socially included by their peers, fewer difficulties in school, are more emotionally stable, and ultimately are more resilient and therefore more independent. So how do we use emotion coaching when we ourselves are triggered by behaviours we are witnessing that have a direct impact on us? Well, emotions are part of our own stress response, self-regulation process, and the social engagement process system that you can see here, that's both sides of this coin here, are interlinked, and how well they connect and interrelate has a big impact on how we behave, and the emotion coaching approach helps that connection. So emotion coaching is a connecting process from a protective stance to a connective stance, and language is the tool used in emotion coaching to make that connection. So emotion coaching works with the anatomy and physiology of our brains to support the development of emotional regulation. What's probably going on is when we cannot regulate, it's that we do not have strong enough integrated connections, and the pathways are not strong enough yet. So emotion coaching strengthens the right kind of neural connection in order for us to be able to regulate. Polyvagal theory is becoming more well known, and we know that children who have been emotion coached have better vagal systems, and this is all linked to survival and is about protecting and connecting. So the vagus nerve goes everywhere in our body and is part of the parasympathetic nervous system. when we talk about things, up-regulation and down-regulation takes place, and I'll explain that now. So here's an example of how emotion coaching and up-regulatory systems can be supported. So if you imagine that you were in a car crash, and most of us have been at some point, we know that when that happens, we go into shock and our lid can flip. I'm making some assumptions here for the short course that you've seen this before. If not, then you will learn about that on the long course, but it's a sort of a lovely, very easy physical representation of how the brain works. That represents our integrated brain and the problem-solving brain. This one flipped under here represents the reactionary brain. It's our survival brain. And to have our brains working well so that they're integrated and connected and self-regulatory, these two sides of the brain work together. But in some circumstances, under extreme pressure, something happens, we react to it, our lid flips. Okay? So this little way of communicating, lid flipping, has been around for a while, but hopefully you can get that now. So when we imagine being in our car crash, our brain flips, these two sides of our brain separate, and at that point there becomes real risk of conflict. So if either of those two characters were emotion coach, they would put that into place in order to resolve that situation in a non-conflictive way. So you might start with taking a couple of breaths to put that lid back on, or start to get the lid back on, regulate yourself. And then part of the emotion coaching process is also to acknowledge and validate how the other party feels, until you both calm down through mirroring. And at this point, the vagus nerve becomes less and less triggered, and oxytocin helps us to calm down. And the point of emotion coaching is therefore about us getting to a pro-social response to difficult behaviours rather than an aggressive reaction to difficult behaviours. Some children are born with better vagal tones, and some need direct teaching. And when we think about when babies are born, they've got we've all had very primitive development. So if there's something wrong, we cry until we scream if we don't get that need met. And we do that because we can't run away. We actually can't fight when we're babies. So the majority of parents would pick that baby up, rock them, soothe them, shush them, give them something to eat. And this triggers the baby's nervous system, lets them know that everything's okay and fine. We can't actually get rid of stress. It's just part of everyday life. But actually, when you think about it, it's not stress that's the problem. It's that we are often ourselves in a zone of tolerable stress. It's just when that stress becomes so much that we might describe it as toxic stress. And this is where the ACE stuff comes from, where there's been no chance of recovery for children, and they've had no chance to have the brain connect again and the vagal tone fine-tune until you can be able to self-regulate and calm down. They haven't had that experience because there's been no co-regulation. So emotion coaching is about co-regulation. So co-regulation goes back and forth throughout our lives as we learn about it and learn how to regulate ourselves. And as professionals, we are co-regulating all the time, and we need to be aware of secondary trauma by the application of reactive behaviour management strategies. So we need to work to avoid this through the application of relational practices, which is what I was talking about in the first instance. And we need to learn how to empty our buckets of stress, especially in times of COVID, which we're all in the lockdown again. So we have an inbuilt surveillance system that is constantly checking that the relationships, the experience, the environment we find ourselves in are safe. When we feel safe in our environment and in our relationships, we are able to suppress the stress response system and focus our energies on socially engaging with others and learning. If we feel challenged and are unable to use our social engagement skills to manage the threat to remain safe, we will use our more primitive stress regulation system to do so. So, secure, nurturing environments and stimulating, engaging experiences support the development of neuronal networks that help build our brains and connect our brains. So what do you do to feel seen and feel emotionally and physically safe? Do you have a regulation system? Do you have a calming corner? What happens with children and what happens for adults too? And you start, for those of you who are familiar with attachment theory, you'll see from this PowerPoint that we've got the 4 S's of attachment very, very much apply to emotion coaching, to be derived from that to some extent. So it's about feeling safe, it's about feeling seen, it's about feeling soothed, and it's about feeling secure. And that's what we're always trying to do, is inbuild safety and security to everything that we do when we're in the educational environment. And emotion coaching helps with recovery by providing opportunities for integration, relationships, mirroring, and repetition. So what is emotion coaching? Well, it's important first to realise that the emotion coaching actually it's been put into 4 steps, but sometimes you won't do those 4 steps in order. If your attunement is right, you will know how long to stay in each step, and you cannot do. Also, it's important to know that you can't do the problem solving bit when the child isn't calm, i.e., attunement hasn't been reached. So emotion coaching helps children understand the different emotions they experience, why they occur, and how to handle them. It's about helping children when they are flipping their lid, which we've talked about, and experiencing strong and or unpleasant emotions. It helps to build internal regulation of emotions and hence their behaviour, rather than relying on external frameworks to manage or modify behaviour. Which does include learning about rules and expectations. Now, John Gottman, who did all the initial research into emotion coaching, actually identified 5 elements this is where it's come from, to parenting approaches when they looked at families where children were well regulated, and he noticed the following things from the parents he was studying. Well-regulated children were experiencing effective parents who were able to calm their child by their empathetic response to what the child was feeling. And once calm, the child was then supported to recognise and label the emotions they'd experienced. The parents helped the child understand and learn about acceptable and unacceptable behaviours, and help them to identify alternative behaviours and responses to better resolve issues. So ultimately, the emotional experience becomes one of teaching with a child to help themselves. So let's just go through each step. We've kind of said it anyway. Step 1 would be about recognising the child's feelings and empathising with them. Step 2, validate the feelings and label them. Step 3, set limits on behaviour if it's needed by that point, because sometimes it wouldn't be. And step 4, when they're calm, go and problem solve them with the child. So emotion coaching is a different approach to our most commonly used behaviour management strategies, which is the common discourse in English schools particularly, though in Scottish schools they've moved on to having a discourse about relation approaches to well-being. Behaviour approaches are very much more about external regulation, i.e. somebody is doing the regulation for them, and this is why we have the red line round the face there, because it's all about external control. What emotion coaching is doing is teaching children and adults to bring that sense of control, represented by the red line, internal. So it's about them controlling themselves, not about a reliance on external frameworks and other people are regulating for them. Most of the children stay inside the red rings in external control by use of rules and procedures and consistency. So for most of the children, if you think about a school, for most of the time, they have enough rules and regs to keep them regulated, because in effect the majority of them can self-regulate anyway. But you tend to find that the same children stay the same children over and over again are still the ones who have not developed any sense of internal regulation there, and they're the ones that the external frameworks don't work for. And we all have these children in school where whatever you seem to do in terms of rules and regulations and rewards still are finding it very tricky to do what we need them to do. So behaviourist approaches don't really have an impact on certain children because they just don't respond to them. Zero tolerance is an even bigger external system, but again, it's that same percentage of children still continue to behave in the same way. So this internal regulation is the relationships that help us to develop it. It's about using emotion coaching as a relational strategy. It's a bit of a philosophical shift, which sometimes we have to take that as a leap of faith. But what's nice about having evidence-based approaches like emotion coaching is that we've got some evidence that actually different ways of managing behaviour, in terms of the broadest sense, can make an impact. So if we think about some simple examples of emotion coaching scripts we might use. I can see that you get angry when that happens. I would feel that angry if it happened to me. There's another example. I can see you frowning and you're kicking the wall and you're showing a lot of energy. I'd be feeling like that too if I didn't want to do something. Another example. I've noticed you looking around at others who are working on their projects. I wonder if you might be feeling nervous about doing it, or nervous about whether your work's going to be good enough. Have I got that right? So you're not judging in this approach, you're observing and being interested in what's happening and relating straight away to how that child might appear to be and how they're looking around and what their facial expression is, and then you're relating it pretty quickly to emotion. I can see that you get angry when that happens. I've noticed you looking around. I wonder if you might be feeling nervous right now. So this is the way in. This is the kind of statements that you will learn to use over time when you start emotion coaching. As practitioners, we have to be self-regulated, and we certainly have to learn to be self-regulated pretty quickly when we're working with children. And there are always occasions where it's that phrase, isn't it? Someone's going to press their buttons because that's what sets you off, and you're own lid flipping. And when you're thinking as a practitioner about how you're going to implement this, you have to kind of start with yourself. So good questions to ask yourself are: how do you feel about feelings? And you might be doing this when you're training your own staff, actually. How do you feel about feelings? How do you react to others' emotions? How does your child's behaviour make you feel? How do you self-regulate? So when we think about teacher training, for example, it's about emphasising the need to be human. We're not robots, and that we all learn how to regulate it because it doesn't come naturally for many people. And also, you might notice maybe in yourself and maybe others in colleagues in the school you work, that you might notice people actually having blocks about accepting emotion coaching because they're having to rethink how they see behaviour in a different way than they've ever had to think about it before. And you can see, and you'll experience staffing having that kind of aha moment where the penny drops and think, well, if I look at this a different way, or I see that child in a different way, and I'm curious about that child rather than jumping in and putting in sanctions straight away, then that's quite a big philosophical shift for some colleagues. We've said in the course, emotion coaching is a great self-regulatory tool. Of course it is, but it isn't the only one, and it's very important that you consider using other regulation tools alongside emotion coaching. So I've put this slide up because it summarises in one place everything we need to know about zones of regulation. The thing about zones of regulation is it's a visual tool, so it's quite accessible for children where we've got some level of language difficulty. But having emotion coaching and having zones working together in your school is really a good way to go. The zones, if you're not aware of zones, it is another course, so I'm not going to go into it now, but you can see, I think, from the different colour representations here, that actually the basis of the emotion of the zones approach is for children to start to recognise when they're moving out of the green zone, which is the self-regulation zone, and what they can do, what tools they need to use to stay in that zone. Doing that with emotion coaching, like I say, is a great way to go. And for staff and schools who use emotion coaching, I liked this quote because it says it all. I feel more in control, but less controlling. And it's because you're actually empowering and training children to manage themselves rather than you having to manage them. And that can be a cause of burnout. So, final thoughts. It isn't a quick fix, and it isn't a substitute for other interventions as well. We've talked about zones, but there are other ones out there that you might wish to use, like mindfulness. But we'll talk about that a little bit more on the longer course. It isn't therapy. It isn't a remedy for everything. But what it is a universal relational approach that supports emotional regulation through co-regulation. It is about helping children to recognise, label, manage and understand emotions in themselves and others so they can self-regulate and they can manage difficult situations or even non-difficult situations independently. And it is not about dismissing or disapproving of emotions, much rather it's about learning to recognise them and read them in themselves and in others. So, that's the end of this short training session. I do hope you found it helpful. There's a lot, obviously, that we haven't covered today, so it'd be great if you came back later in January to do the full course with me. But if you don't, I do hope you've enjoyed it and do hope it's given you some food for thought. So thank you very much for your time.